Tonight, on a special extended Localite, Jon continues his discussion with humanitarian Scott Zagarino. That's all tonight on Localite.
Well, Scott, it's good to have you here again.
Well, thank you.
Obviously, a continuation of the last show, and we spent a lot of time talking about the differences between what you're doing and the different organizations out there that most, if not all of us, at one point or another, have made contributions to. And where I want to start off is you want to be very clear that it's not, you're not discouraging giving. It's, in a sense, rethinking how you're doing that and the effectiveness of your giving. Would that be correct?
Well, the question is, what got done?
Yeah.
Is if because you have a history of this, and you may have given to the same organization every 5 years. If you stop and ask yourself what got done, and you put aside, we funded a $40 million gene research program at the University of Michigan. Well, during that time, 75,000 people died painfully of cancer. Now, I'm not saying don't do the gene study. We can cure these things, especially with the Human Genome Project and those things. But don't abandon the people who are suffering today in favor of no suffering in 50 years, which is a marginal proposition, and no one knows the timeline.
So how are people, this is a battle of education. I mean, this has been a education for myself, and really sort of being enlightened with how this works, because as your assistant had mentioned to me, we don't know how these organizations work. You know, we essentially take them at face value because I think at the core of all of us, we want to believe they're doing good and that nobody's in there being opportunistic or taking advantage of giving, loving people. Unfortunately, that's not the world we live in. So how are you helping people understand this concept of giving to a successful outcome instead of giving to a successful organization?
Well, I think one is that you finish things. You keep your word and you finish what you started. That's where all faith is born, is that if it actually happens. The second thing is that we, I believe in leading by example. So every year I do something to fundraise. In our system this year, because of the hours that I work, I may have bitten off more than I can chew, but I'm going to try and paddle from Hood River to Portland in one day.
Wow.
62 miles. Yes, now that it's getting closer to summer, I'm saying, wow. But we have a program where, because we're very strict with our budgets and we know what needs to be spent to finish things, that if we've raised a little more or we've cut back on expenses a little more, we have an internal program called Rising Tide Grants. And a perfect example that you may have seen on the news is that there's a guy in Portland who contracted pancreatic cancer. Started a girls' basketball program at Park Rose High School, 2 sons, upper middle class guy.
Yeah.
Right?
Interesting last name.
Delastatius.
Yes.
Dave Delastatius.
Yes, I did hear.
Who just left hospice. Doesn't have very long to go. And I saw a bit about him somewhere, and he was going broke because his insurance only covered so much of his care that he was buying his meds every other month to save money for his boys and to keep his home. And so we had this little overage. So we called his high school principal and we said, and anonymously we've learned lasts about 4 days. It has a very short lifespan, but we paid for his meds. We were sending him his money for his meds every month so that he could take them weekly. It doesn't matter whether you're doing that or building a 500-room orphanage. The reason you gave is because you want to do good, because people are good. If you see somebody stumble and fall, you'll pick them up. Mm-hmm. We've proven that over and over again. And if that's the case, then why not make it effective? Why not really end suffering? And divide it up. Let the National Institutes of Health, with 37,000 employees, cure cancer. I can't count the number of people who wear a rubber wristband, and not just a yellow one. And I've gone up to them on the street and said, tell me why you support that organization. Because they're curing this. That's not actually what that organization does. They just like the rubber wristband. So you're right, it's partly education, but it's partly playing on the basic kindness of people and their willingness to help, and we're the tool. We're the effective tool. And it's hard because we're not making extravagant promises. We're not going to cure cancer. We're not going to cure AIDS. But I will tell you that in the case of Dave Dalastasius, we paid for his funeral because they wouldn't give it to him unless he prepaid it.
Wow. Well, when we come back from the break, I want to talk about how monumental what you're doing not only is, but how that just huge hill or mountain that you must be feeling like you're climbing sometimes, and how do you stay engaged in positive thinking of I am making a difference. So when we come back, we'll talk a bit about that and of course some other things. So stay with us.
Later,
I get really depressed. I get really angry. I cry at the drop of a hat over a lot of these situations where I don't want to do this anymore.